Hey everyone, welcome back. This is a prospective video based on test cluster contents. Keep in mind that details may change in the future and that this is not necessarily representative of final release. Thermal Sunder is an interesting augment. On the surface, it seems to work simply like Shock Trooper, Smite Infusion, Nourish, etc. That is definitely what is probably intended to, but there is even more going on below the surface and implications. So let's see what this last augment from the update will bring. Thermal Transfer is obviously a Thermal Sunder augment, but because Thermal Sunder is the Helminth ability of Gauss, this means that this augment can be used on anyone, just like Irelis Surging Blades. But is it as a good ability to be placed in the same caliber? Well, it offers new elements that we have been missing. Up until this point, for Helminth, we have Electric and Radiation covered from Shock Trooper and Smite Infusion. Toxin is covered by Nourish. That leaves the primary elements Cold and Heat missing. Unlike the classic elemental augments, a Thermal Transfer has a base elemental value of 75% instead of 100. It also only lasts 30 seconds instead of 40, but now we have all primary elements available as subsumes. Now, these new values are more than decent already, as any persistent ability that lasts longer than 30 seconds is good enough in my eyes. This means you don't need to build for a bunch of duration on the frame to get the most out of the augment, which is extremely important for a Helminth ability candidate. It also only has a 12 meter radius base range, unlike Shock Trooper's 15, but this is still respectable. Yes, this augment allows you to buff allies within the ring just like it says, and actually, the ring even persists for a duration. It functions like Wisp's mode buffs, so as long as you are inside of the ring, your elemental buffs have infinite duration until the ring expires. Once you leave the ring, the countdown begins. But there is one big caveat. This augment does not give general elemental damage buffs. In fact, this is probably the most misleading out of the 4 new augments. It specifically gives heat or cold elemental buffs only depending on whether you hold or tap Thermal Sunder, or whatever you have your ability settings on if you reverse them. But basically, this ability only lets you buff yourself with heat or cold. It is also treated the same as Shock Trooper or Lichen innate weapon elements, where they fit in the 9th imaginary mod slot for elemental hierarchy. And if you have multiple elemental buffs like how Thermal Transfer allows, the buffs will sort them in an HCET hierarchy: Heat, Cold, Electric, Toxin. It's the exact same system I mentioned in the past when dealing with Lich and Sister elements. So what does this mean? It means you cannot make viral heat by just equipping Toxin. Modded elements will always take priority, but if you buff with Cold, then Heat will combine with the Toxin mod first, even if you casted the Cold buff first. If you don't have any elements on the build and you cast both buffs, you will make a blast damage. What you can do though is mod just Electric, then cast both buffs. You will end up with Radiation and Cold, which is fantastic for Eidolons. Except this is no different than just modding Heat and casting Shock Trooper, both of which are Helminth abilities, by the way. Thermal Transfer needs to cast both buffs to match the firepower Shock Trooper gives because it has 100% scaling instead of 75. So I would say while it does work for Eidolons, it's more work for no reason. And if you forget to cast the heat buff from Thermal Transfer, you just get Magnetic, which Eidolons resist. Ew. So what can this actually do that matters at all? What if you want to make just a slash build? This is the counterpart to Nourish for a pure viral slash setup. Thermal Transfer has a baseline cold value of 75% and lasts 30 seconds. Nourish has a baseline toxin value of 50% and lasts 25 seconds. So if you want a buff that lasts longer or a stronger viral buff because you're using 100 munitions or internal bleeding or hemorrhage, then take Thermal Transfer. If you're using a weapon that is slashing based off the innate IPS, you want as little viral as possible. In that case, you may want to consider using Nourish because it is weaker and just tolerate the 5 seconds less base duration, but that's up to you. The final thing Thermal Transfer allows? We haven't had a way to get heat buffs on any kind of subsume. This is basically Ember's Fireball Frenzy. This means we can put heat inherit on any frame we want now. Any frame can get absolutely ridiculous boinker yoinkers heat awaiting. This also means you don't even have to mod heat at all on the DPS weapon, since it will scale up the massive heat percent your primer has as modded plus this buff and having the heat buff on your DPS also. Previously, without God Roll Ribbons, the only frame that could actually pull off insane busted heat inherits was Ember. Other frames could still use it, but it was nowhere near as impressive. Now every frame will have ridiculous insane heat inherit scaling just like her. Let's take a look at some sample builds. We will look at a weapon that can slash through 100 munitions first, then Hemorrhage, then natural IPS slash setups with Thermal Transfer, and finally heat inherit setups on frames that are not Ember. Here's an easy one, Kuva Brahmo on a Toxin Progenitor. So Thermal Transfer with the cold buff alone gives us Viral. This is the only way to get primed Firestorm, Hunting Munitions, and also a primed Bane to double dip to slash procs all on the same build. Normally you would have to either skip the primed Bane or primed Firestorm. This is because viral slash builds require 2 elements and Hunting Munitions, whereas a pure corrosive build only needs 2 elements. Yes, you could also use Roar to replace the primed Bane, but Roar only has 30% multiplier of 100 strength. You need 183 strength for it to match a primed Bane, and directly affects your damage output, whereas Thermal Transfer has 75% base and can reach a 90% similar to a elemental mod with just 120 strength. Granted, we use prime cryo rounds for primary weapons, which requires 220 strength to match, but really, modding for viral is just for the status, which is already by far the dominant element on Brahma. Getting the Bane percent right is much more important for actual slash scaling, so it's much easier to just use Thermal Transfer than Roar. Obviously, Eclipse is also an option, but lighting issues means you can't use it on all maps. Take your pick. Remember, even if you took Eclipse, you'd still have to give up one of these mods. Or you could go Eclipse Corrosive, which doesn't need 100 munitions, but that's not what I'm showing you today. Now, how about a Hemorrhage setup? Well, this is a Catch Moon which has force impact on all shots, but no innate elements are useful for viral here. Unfortunately, the innate heat takes priority according to the HCET hierarchy for innate and buffed elements, so you will not be able to get viral unless you mod it on the weapons with 2 slots, which is what we're trying to avoid. So let's look at another weapon that can do viral slash with Hemorrhage. This is Imos, which coincidentally has pure toxin on the AoE. This is perfect because the secondary projectiles have forced impact, and it just means with thermal transfer we get viral without even having to mod any elements at all. This auger pact is supposed to be Hornet Strike, but I just couldn't fit it because of polarity reasons. But I also have Galvanized Shot on this build, and you may be wondering why. That's because Galvanized Shot works like Eclipse on this build instead of base damage, so you do want to slot them together. Dexterity is going to be a little difficult to stack up base damage on Zymos to start, so pair it with a melee before you start spraying. Fun little gun to use, feel free to try it out. And if you run this with Gauss and Roar with a Scourge to get bullet attractor headshots, oh, mock crash builds can get pretty lethal. Now, how about a natural slashing weapon? How about the comb? Well, the Kuva variant would be better for this, but I just don't own it. This particular comb has no innate element, so I had to slot a rank 0 contagious spread here, but a Kuva comb could pick a toxin progenitor. Then you don't have to mod it on at all, but otherwise if it isn't a Kuva weapon, then you would run a low rank toxin mod here. On a Kuva comb, this free slot you could probably put in Modus setup in my opinion, as this is a shotgun, or Prime Tactical Pump for laser fast reloads, or Vigilante Supplies for endurance setups due to ammo economy burn. Guncio doesn't scale properly on comb, so don't equip it. Galvanized Acceleration, on the other hand, is extremely important for Kuva comb, as the actual falloff is way worse on the Kuva variant. The ranges of falloff are similar, but comb only loses about 3/4 of its damage at max range, whereas Kuva comb loses well over 90%. It handles pretty nicely if find, and a lower strength thermal transfer setup works beautifully to maintain high slash weight while spreading viral through sheer amount of multi-shot. And heat inherit setups? Well, the best case is Rhino, for easy iron skin and full roar scaling. But really any frame could pull this off, since getting enough heat scaling is honestly harder than getting Bane scaling, like I said. This will make Rhino heat inherit even stronger than Ember heat inherit as in the past, because roar gets a massive penalty when you subsume it on other frames. And in team comps, you can stack your entire team with roar and thermal transfer without even having to bring an Ember on the team anymore. You can subsume over as 1 or 4. Jellian would pick as 4 as we don't have any range on the build. The Augment would go in this empty slot. You would just need 1 more Forma over Rolling Guard to fit the Augment. Thermal Transfer would give 223% more heat to your primer with 298 strength. On a pistol, that means you reach 478 heats, and you still get 149% roar paired alongside a 55% Bane. Now you get to double dip a 204% Bane modifier for 9.24 times more damage. Here's a generic pistol primer. I'm just using Epitaph just cuz for AoE, the rest is all quality of life for fire rate, etc. But the important part is you want to make sure that you have both heat mods on for 255% heat and the primed Bane. The other weapon can be whatever. Honestly, you can use whatever you want. For primer DPS, I just pick pistol since it's the only weapon type that can reach 255% heat for mods. So I will DPS with Gaze, a beam kit gun built for full crit. You essentially want a weapon that can apply heat stacks easily and also crit well. So beams are perfect for this. Melee also works well for DPS, or anything that either hits insanely hard but doesn't hit much, or doesn't hit too hard but applies an absolutely ridiculous amount of heat procs, like an Ignis. Then you have stuff that fits both builds, a truck and and tons of heat, such as Phantasma. But really, anything that is at least hybrid viable and usable for Steel Path will shine. This is a primary gaze built with Tremor, Gaze, and Splat. It's meant to have fat range and reaches out to 30-something meters, as it was originally meant for Eidolon hunting but works well for normal gameplay as well. All crit because it's a beam, so still hybrid viable. This is the build. Speed trigger should be Vile Acceleration, but I can't fit it. Serration can be whatever, as it's the flex slot since we already have Guncio. If you want, you could technically slot Galvanized Sculpt here. We really are running out of mods, or Primed Magazine Warp to increase the magazine from 43 to 67, it's up to you. But we don't need to mod any heat on because Thermal Transfer will give us 223% and this will not combine into the radiation. I'm going to be running this last showcase on Ember because the Augment isn't out yet, but the premise is similar. Fireball Frenzy and Roar instead of Thermal Transfer and Roar. Very pog for dealing with Steel Path Grenier, and Shreds Stemless if you bring an armor strip, which in this case is this Vastalok build. Make sure you shoot your Epitaph first for the first heat stack. This Vastalok is only here to refresh the heat stacks while stripping armor off after you've shot your Epitaph. If you want a full explanation on how Heat Inherit works, check out my Neferi Heat Inherit video at the top right. Currently by far the best dual daggers in the game and even sits among the best melee. If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like or better yet subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. 79.5% of you are not subscribed. I'm trying my best to get you new information out always, as soon as possible, like I've done with covering all this new war stuff. Stick around if you want to see interesting memes and builds on a nearly daily basis. I'm going to continue dropping tons more new war content in the future. You don't want to miss out on any of that, do you? That'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching, and see you all next time.